What's going on, guys? Welcome to the video. Now, as you all know, the Labour election manifesto came out earlier, and as we all expected, it will literally destroy the UK economy. The Labour Party and John McDonnell claim that they've costed this at £83 billion a year over the course of the next 5 years and likely continuing after that. But it doesn't really matter what they've costed it at because it's nonsensical. Not only for the amounts they plan to spend, but how they plan to get the money back and the things they are actually doing. It's essentially communism. But we will go into all of what they plan to do in a moment. First, let's see what the Politics Live Shows panel had to say about it and the political editor of the BBC, who will give a quick rundown on it, and I will try and give a less conservative opinion on the prices of these so-called policies, because we have to remember these are government policies. They never cost what politicians or the media claim they will. It's usually double or triple. HS2, for example. But anyway, let's get into it.
Go to Birmingham. We've been joined by Norman Smith of the BBC. He's been covering it. Norman, good to see you there. What are the headlines that you're taking away from the unveiling of the manifesto?
Well, I guess the big headline are some of the huge pledges being made by Labour: 1 million new council houses, 1 million new jobs, a 5% rise in public sector pay, scrapping the rise in the pension age from 66, restoring and reinstating 3,000 axed bus routes. I mean, a whole swathe of really very, very significant announcements. I guess the question is, how is it paid for? Now, in the Grey Book, John McDonnell sets out around £83 billion worth of spending pledges, which he says are met by £83 billion worth of tax rises. Now, the bulk of those seem to me to be loaded on business and the city and the banks. So there will be a windfall tax on oil and gas companies. There will be a transaction tax on the city. There will be an excessive pay levy, I presume, on excessive boardroom pay. For the better off, there will be higher income tax levels. There'll be a reversal of inheritance tax. There'll be a second homes tax. And all that, according to John McDonnell, adds up. But on top of that, of course, you've got a massive borrowing plan by Labour to borrow something like £400 billion for this transformation fund to invest in roads, infrastructure, green projects. That, of course, depends on the city being prepared to continue to lend to a Labour government at today's very low rates.
So there was the political editor of the BBC. Even he thinks it's out there, and he's being quite conservative because he's part of the BBC and he's got to be very careful what he says. But even from the few things that he's picked out there, which is not really the highlights of it, you can see that it's not going to be good. Now let's hear what an expert on the panel of the Politics Live Show had to say about it.
Here for getting rid of student loans as well, which is clearly something that mostly benefit from the highest.
Can we tell if they intend to write off the existing debt?
It doesn't say that.
It doesn't say that.
As far as I can see, at least.
If you are going to add 40 billion in business taxes and you're going to take 10% of every company that employs more than 250 people, why would anybody invest in Britain?
Couple of reasons on that, and the 10% is after 10 years. It's a 1% dilution a year.
Up to 10%.
Lower than share dilutions you might see to give shares to chief executives.
But you're not. But you're not going to.
It's a very low rate.
You're not going to buy these shares.
It's a very low rate of transfer there, and share dilutions are fairly typical.
But you're not going to buy these shares, are you?
It's dilution. That's what's happening. So
yes. So you don't pay for the companies get nothing for these shares.
A tiny 1% a year is nothing. We're saying that this is a reasonable, fair transfer of value back to the people who work in those companies, because that's where the value is going.
But no, actually it's not, because they only get £500 of the dividend.
No, you get a genuine share, and
the workers don't get the share.
Yes, of course, you get a collective share. It's equivalent to something like John Lewis, for example, where you work there, you get a kind of collective share in the thing, you get a stake in the company, you get a say in how the thing is run. So it's got that kind of the same sort of impact.
You couldn't sell the share.
That would be well, no, because that would be if you get something for free. This is the quid pro quo with it.
But isn't it worth saying? I mean, what this is a transfer of 10% of the value of these stocks from people who have savings and pensions and so on. So that is an expropriation of 10% of their wealth.
Eventually,
isn't it? right word to use?
10%. No, I don't think so, because if you look at share dilutions for the top chief executives in companies, you're looking at a rate of sort of 2% a year, that kind of thing. Share dilution is actually pretty common in terms of how companies manage their finances.
I mean, this would essentially be taking 10% of the value.
No, it's not taking 10%. It's 10% after 10 years. So it's a very, very low rate.
But it's still 10%.
It's still 10%.
That does matter.
But what is wrong with this statement? After 10 years, you would take 10% of the value of these firms as currently owned by their shareholders.
After 10 years, you would have taken.
You would have taken,
right? So
and you would have transferred them to someone else.
You transfer them to a pot which is held, held collectively by the people who work in that company.
Which is a policy, but I think you need to be very clear about it. It is transferring out of everyone's pension pots and savings 10% of that to a group of other people.
It's transferring after 10 years, you get to 10%.
It doesn't matter what the time is, it's 10%.
Well, take a rate of growth of a typical sort of 250, FTSE 250 company, right? And the rate of growth over 10 years is enough to say at the end of 10 years, this 1% dilution a year, which to repeat is small relative to company dilutions of shares you might see to pay chief executives, we're simply moving that further down the hierarchy in the company, if you like.
What major company has diluted its equity by 10% to pay a chief executive?
Because it's 1%, and it's 1% a year. So we keep coming back to this, right? So if it's 1% a year, it's not like 10% all at once. This is a very significant difference. You've seen that, okay? So you can add up to 10, it's good.
Sounds to me as though Labour would create an awful lot of companies that have 249 employees. This is precisely the reason that we so frequently hear reports of companies discussing with lawyers and their accountants how, in the event of a Labour government, they would transfer their wealth overseas and how they would set up subsidiaries and so on. These conversations are taking place, not helped by the fact that in recent months John McDonnell is reported to have asked Treasury officials about the policy of implementing exchange controls. And I know that's not in the manifesto, but bear in mind that they downplayed whether they were going to nationalise BT, and now we find that is policy.
There's no policy to introduce exchange controls, it's just nonsense.
Not yet.
Okay.
It's the first one.
Let's go back to Birmingham. Excuse me, I want to go to the Shadow Chancellor, who's been...
I mean, that has to be the most incredible couple of minutes I've ever witnessed of television, if I'm honest. This Labour idiot has no clue whatsoever how stupid he sounds. It's literally Diane Abbott's school of car crash interviews right there. How on earth this guy actually thought he would get away with saying that it's not 10% if it's done over 1% each year for 10 years is beyond me. I mean, there is no logic to what he's saying. He's got 3 people there looking at him like he's an absolute imbecile. Yet he still sits there and defends this communist policy that wants to take 10% of companies and give it to the workers, but not as an actual share like he claims, as a fake share that gives them £500 dividends, not the actual share for them to sell or make as much as it would make in that given year or a given time frame. Another question that should be asked on that policy is what would happen to all the spare money, because it'd be more than £500 a year I would expect on that basis. So what happens to the rest of the money? Does the Labour Party siphon that off somewhere, or is it one of their little friends? Perhaps it could be. Who knows? You even hear the Telegraph bit at the end of it say there are conversations with big business taking place at the moment, planning of course to get out of the UK if Jeremy Corbyn is elected. And to be honest, I wouldn't blame them. I would advise most people, if you can, leave. No one's going to want to be under this Corbyn government with its free broadband invading your privacy and your life, watching what you're doing and everything. I dread to imagine what would happen if Corbyn gets in. We all know it won't be good, as these big businesses, like she said. But at the end of the day, the media haven't really covered much that's in the manifesto. So I read the whole 107-page manifesto and took some of the key points out of it, and a lot more key points than they did. And when I was considering these policies, I didn't take the conservative estimates on the pricing forum that this lot did. So let's take a quick look at them. Now, this is not going to be too in-depth over each of these points because there's quite a few of them, but I will tell you the page number of the manifesto for you to go and read the full information. We have on page 13 their plan to put 400 billion into a transformation fund. That's borrowed money that is there, so national debt. 450, 500 billion in total once we've paid it back in 30 or 50 years. We then had on page 15 their policy to steal utility companies. Page 23 consisted of them wasting another 5.3 billion. A right to food, so communism with an unknown cost. How much does eradicating hunger cost, anyone? Have we managed to do it yet? 4.3% NHS budget increase, so roughly 26 to 30 billion pounds. Next page, page 33. We had 2 billion to modernise hospitals, along with 1 billion extra in public health and 4,500 more health visitors and school nurses. Total cost unknown. Invest unknown amounts in workforce training for the NHS throughout their career and create a drug company to make drugs at the cost of who knows what. That was on page 35. We then had page 36, unspecified social care fund increases. Cost, once again, unknown. 30 hours childcare for 2 and 3-year-olds. Pages 39 and 40, lowering primary school class sizes, therefore requiring more schools are built, with no figures on how much this will cost, including new government body to oversee the schools. Page 40 and 41. Free higher education and zero tuition fees at universities. Never-ending cost, total, obviously unknown. Page 45. Cyber security reform, when they claimed a DDoS was a sophisticated attack. Drop me out. Countless of millions or billions wasted on them doing that. Page 47. Bringing back 3 legal aid for almost every case you could conceivably imagine. Unknown cost, once again, but quite high. Page 52. At least 5,000 new firefighters. They did not even put figures for that, so definitely cost unknown. Page 53. Free broadband at the cost of 100 billion plus, at least. More like 200 if you ask me. £10 per hour living wage for all workers over 16, while claiming that savings in public finances will be able to help small businesses manage the extra costs. And as you heard earlier in the Politics Live clip, a stake in the companies. Cost unknown, especially when you factor in how many companies are going to up and leave on that basis. Page 62. Enforce a 32-hour week, so 4-day working week, guys. This we already knew. Cost to the economy? Massive. Page 63. Social justice level playing field. Unknown costs for never-ending fake outrage. Page 64. Social Justice Commission. More public sector workers and unknown costs due to, once again, never-ending fake outrage. Pages 65, 66, 67, 68 and 69. Equalities and women. Once again, unknown, never-ending costs for fake outrage. Pages 70 and 71. Open borders and won't deport anyone who has family here. Automatic right to remain for all EU citizens after Brexit, including voting rights for anyone resident in the UK. Cost unknown but astronomical and only ever increasing. Page 73. New universal credit system, costing hundreds of millions at least, and likely being no better than the current one, but will likely be more expensive. No way of knowing how much it will cost, with new advisors, telephone services, outreach and one-to-one support. They also plan to scrap bedroom tax and increase local housing allowances, so definitely cost unknown. Page 74. Increase employment and support allowance by £30 per week. Page 77. 1 billion fire safety fund. Also plan to set up a new land sovereign trust with powers to buy land cheaply for low-cost housing. Developers to face a use or lose it tax if they take too long to develop the land. 150,000 homes built a year by the end of 2024. Total cost unknown but increases year on year. Doesn't matter what Labour's costing strategy says, we all know how government projects go. Page 80. End homelessness. Cost unknown and likely impossible. Page 82. 16 and 17-year-old votes. Page 83 and 84. Northern Ireland gets a £1.9 billion increase in funding, £3.4 billion more in Wales, and at least £100 billion extra for Scotland, because Corbyn needs to cosy up to the SNP. Separate from that, an extra £6 billion to retrofit Scottish houses, while allowing the Scottish Bank £20 billion more borrowing power for local projects. Page 89, Jeremy Corbyn's Brexit manifesto bullshit. We'll go over that in a separate and dedicated video. Page 96, £400 million diplomatic spending increase to promote peace. Page 98 and 99. Climate diplomacy. Employ more climate change public service workers. Never-ending unknown cost. Page 103. More inequality and social justice. Unknown rising costs, including foreign aid. So there are the main points I took from their manifesto, and the fact that literally none of them could be on budget or likely will be on budget. And as for £500 billion estimates over this parliament, I'd say they were far too low. I actually dread to think how much it would cost, and my earlier estimate of £750 billion is way out as well. It could be double or triple that by the time everything is said and done, because of course, as I've said many times, and as most of you will already know, government projects are never on time and never on budget. And of course, most of that is taken away from the fact that they plan to nationalise and confiscate businesses left, right and centre in a variety of different fields, once again, at the taxpayer's expense. And they don't even know how much that's going to cost, let's be honest. They don't know how much it's going to cost to nationalise these companies. They're going to have to get Parliament to decide that, so how can they even cost these things? It's just insane. Much like the experts said in the clips we see earlier. But at the end of the day, they're being very conservative with their estimates. I can tell you now, almost every single one of Labour's policies will be well over budget if it ever gets delivered. And their idea of tax is just going to scare off the big companies and the richest, which will then cause job losses, and we all know what happens then. Bye-bye the British economy. But anyway, on that note, I'm going to end it there. This video's gone on for ages. Now, before I go, I want to thank our PayPal, Patreon, Subscribestar and YouTube members for supporting the channel, along with everyone who watches my videos. Remember to let me know what you guys think down in the comments section below. Leave a like, subscribe with the notification bell and share this video as it helps the channel a lot. And I will see you all in the next one.
This Parliament is a dead Parliament. It should no longer sit. It has no moral right to sit on these green benches. They don't like the truth. Twice they have been asked to let the electorate decide upon whether they should continue to sit in their seats, while they block 17.4 million people's votes. This Parliament is a disgrace. But they're too cowardly to give it a go. But the time is coming. The time is coming, Mr. Speaker, when even these turkeys won't be able to prevent Christmas.
There is a pattern consistent throughout history of oppressed people turning on the oppressors, slaves against their owners, the peasantry against the feudal barons, colonies, Mr. Verhofstadt, against their empires, and that is why Britain is leaving. And it doesn't matter which language you use, we are going, and we are glad to be going. We're off.